Hello and welcome to Independence Live. I'm Ian Bruce in Glasgow and this is Rising Clyde, the Scottish climate justice show. For most of the last year, the cost of living crisis and the astronomical rise in people's bills, energy bills, was the big issue facing almost all of us. For trade unions and their members, community groups, a range of movements and campaigns, including much of the climate justice movement, it became the big challenge. So where are we now and what comes next? That's what we're going to talk about today with three people who've been in the thick of it here in Glasgow. But before I introduce our guests, let's look at this short video of one protest just before Christmas.
None of us can pay. Choosing between food or heat, we worry night and day. Hey, rising bills, every kills, but there's another way.
Freeze the prices, stop the fees, and nationalise today.
They don't care two hoots about us, they don't care who's going to die, they just care about racking up their profits and their Christmas bonus. So we're intending to organise, bringing all the groups together, including local organisations that are already fighting this.
Freeze prices!
The people!
Can't pay!
Won't pay!
Will pay!
Can't pay!
Now listen here, Keith Anderson, we're freezing cold today. Your profits keep on rising, but we're not going to pay. We'll say fuck you to Scottish Power and throw our bills away. If you don't give us a proper price freeze.
Thousands of people this winter are going to die as a direct result of people not getting off their arses and doing their jobs, and we are not prepared to take it anymore. So, colleagues and comrades, thank you for coming along today. This is just the start. Sign up to Power the People.
So with us to talk about this are Jess Galloway, who's been played a prominent part in Power to the People and organising those demonstrations, as you just saw. Stuart Bretherton is an organiser for Fuel Poverty Action. They've been at the cutting edge of bringing together the cost of living issue with the climate crisis. And Chia Harrington is active in a whole series of campaigns in this area, in particular around problems of indebtedness with Together Against Debt. Thank you so much to all of you for being with us for this discussion. I'd like to start because I think it's quite confusing to some of us exactly. We hear a lot of different versions of energy prices supposedly coming down and so on and so forth. So I think it'd be useful to kind of try and explain simply, but what exactly is happening to energy bills right now and how that's affecting people, particularly those most vulnerable. Stuart, maybe you could give us a little bit of an explanation there.
Yeah, well, in some ways, we're in roughly the same position as we've been with the energy price guarantee still in place, capping the unit price that we pay for energy at a certain level. So the figure that we've heard a lot of is that the average household will be paying £2,500 towards the energy bills. But of course, that's an average figure. Here in Scotland, for example, where we have colder temperatures, a lot more prepayment meters, the average is a lot higher, perhaps around £3,300, something like that. Meanwhile, you've got other issues like the prepayment meter customers in particular, which there's been a huge scandal around recently, people being forced onto these, pay around 10% more for their general energy usage, plus daily standing charges, late fees if you fall into debt, higher rates during the winter due to colder temperatures rather than more of a spaced out over the course of the year. And of course, if you can't keep up with this, then everything clicks off. You've also got people in less energy efficient homes who'll be paying higher rates, and people in all electric homes as well. We've got members working on this at the minute that if you're purely reliant on electricity, you could be paying up to 3 times more than the average household in your energy bills. And of course, that's a move that's been encouraged because it's supposedly more green. Yet people may have heard recent figures say that we now have the most expensive electricity in the world here in the UK. And part of the reason for that is because it's mostly produced by gas-fired power stations. So we're still at the mercy of global fluctuations in the price of gas. And of course, people may have heard there's different ways of measuring these things, and people will debate it, but the wholesale price of gas is a fraction of what it was back in August when prices were really going through the roof. We're still expecting prices to rise an extra 20% in April as the price guarantee loosens slightly. And then, as was mentioned, some news of potential price reductions as we get towards the summer. And that's already been pushed as good news by the media and the government as well. But we're expecting it to be lowered to something like £2,200 for the average household, which by context still...
Let me get this straight. That means that we're still talking about bills that are like twice as much as they were before April last year.
Yeah. And you've got government support in terms of individual payments being reduced. So even though the price is lowering slightly, people are going to be worse off next winter if that's where it's capped than they were this winter. And I'm sure we can expect government support to reduce even further as we go. So in terms of our membership, we've had people compromising their health through choosing between heating and eating. We've got people writing into us expressing suicidal thoughts as a result of this, and we're not equipped to deal with that. We're not a support or crisis service. Such services are over capacity with the state of things. On more positive news, we've had recently a win over prepayment meters in some ways, with the recent scandal of 500,000 court warrants granted, with only 72 rejected by magistrates for energy companies to force people onto prepayment meters. There's been pressure building in Parliament, in the media. We took direct action last week over a number of days, and Grant Shapps has now called on energy companies to stop forcing people onto prepayment meters. He hasn't introduced an outright ban, which he needs to do, but we've had progress in that area. And we're now also seeing discussion among Ofgem and ministers about options to overhaul our pricing structure, such as a social tariff, which could significantly reduce people's bills if they're on lower incomes by subsidising it from people who can't afford to pay more.
Jess, how does that what Stu is saying, does that tally with what your experience is in the South Side? And what kind of campaigns and organising are you doing there around those issues?
Well, as I say, so I'm involved in Power to the People, and I would be honest, I think Stu is right in the sense that, to some extent we are kind of back in the same place that we were, but I don't want to brush over the fact it has been such a journey for people, I think. In terms of like last summer, when we had like the demonstrations outside Scottish Power, outside Ofgem, and we were literally having hundreds of people coming. And I remember leafleting in the weeks leading up to those. And I remember being stood outside Central Station. And for the first time in years, I had people coming up to me. As I say, I'm sure all of us have stood outside, in the wind and the rain, giving out leaflets and to no relief. But as I said, it was the first time in years, and I had people coming up to me saying, I've seen your campaign on social media. I'm definitely right behind you. I'll be at that demo. And there felt like there was a real momentum behind it. But I think what I'm feeling now, and we've been discussing this at meetings over the past few weeks, is we seem to be falling back into that position of people feeling just resigned, I guess. Sort of numb to, the conditions in which we find ourselves with all of this. And I think the big thing for me in why I got involved in Power to the People in the first place was because I had seen that so many people just seem to be completely disempowered. There seemed to be no belief in the idea that collective action could bring a change. And so, it has been hard to see that now people seem to be falling back into that place. So in terms of the campaigning, so Power to the People, we've got a few local groups that, are sort of doing really concentrated ground up work, I would say, because again, leading on from what Stu was saying, that we do need to be thinking about the fact that, all of these issues around people struggling to pay their electric and energy bills, it has knock-on effects in all parts of people's lives. As you say, people are going to be living with years, if not lifelong debt as a result of this. And as you say, it's not going to be getting any better. People's mental health is suffering. And so that's why very much our focus at the moment is on building networks of resistance, within communities. So
Jess, I'm going to cut in there just a moment because I want to come back, specifically to exactly, what kind of campaigns and so on stuff need to be done next. But you mentioned debt, and that's obviously a key issue. Chia, that's an area you're working in a lot. Just give us an idea of how that feels to people. What kind of experiences are people having with debt at the moment?
Well, yeah, so debt has been a problem that's been on the rise for quite a while now, but since, cost of living, that's kind of gone through the roof. Right now, the UK has fallen into a private debt crisis, which means that, and there's different ways of defining that, but at Debt Justice, the way we define that is that a debt crisis is where you are so much in debt that you basically can't meet your basic needs because you have to fall into debt to meet them, like eating and heating your home. And yeah, that's the reality. And but it's really difficult to get people to talk about debt. There are a few people who are really angry about it and really happy to talk, but most people are really quiet about it because there's so much shame involved, because it's seen as such an individualized problem. It's not seen as a structural issue. And part of the point of Together Against Debt is to actually build a collective political voice around that and saying it's not your fault, it's the structure right now, and kind of build power around that.
So how do you do that? I mean, what kinds of things are you doing to kind of get people to feel more confident about that?
Right. So in July, we had a public consultation, just invited as many people as we could and to talk about this. And we voted on a campaign effectively to focus on school meal debt, because right now families are in debt to Glasgow City Council to feed their own children at school, which is ridiculous. And there's been cases where school meals have been snatched out of young people's hands because their family hasn't paid the debts. It's so wrong. Yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. And how are we doing this? So what we're doing is we're using a community organising strategy to get Glasgow City Council to cancel the debts, because we believe that we need a fair debt write down, which means it's better for everyone if we start writing this debt off, because otherwise people are going to get into dire situations like we're already seeing. And it has huge economic impact as well for the wider economy, which also in relation to climate as well, handling that crisis. We need a good economy to be able to handle that as well. What's
the response from Glasgow City Council been like?
Currently we're at the stage where we're still building allies to take it to Glasgow City Council. A lot of some councillors have ignored us, but some have said that, we see this as a problem and we're going to take it to the council and talk about it, but we're worried because we're worried we don't have enough money to do it. I think they do, but yeah, that's the kind of conversations we're having at the moment.
Yeah, good. You touched precisely on the issue of the climate crisis. Stuart, you've been doing a lot of work around this. I mean, at one level, it seems blindingly obvious that the two things are connected, and yet somehow, the campaigns and so on and so forth are still sort of a bit separate, and everyone thinks they should be more together, but hasn't really quite happened. Just give us an idea of how you're addressing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that applies in a way to all social justice movements. A lot of us are talking about the systemic issues that we face and intersections between all of them, but we all have our own particular focuses, our own theories of change, our own, our primary concerns, whatever it may be. But I think it's worth saying, Fuel Poverty Action from its first inception around 12 years ago was a climate justice movement that was focused on fuel poverty and the fact that despite burning enough oil and gas to destroy the livable world, most people can't, a great many people can't meet their basic energy needs. And you have people freezing to death in their homes every winter because they can't afford to put the heating on. And there has been massive progress. Speaking to my colleagues, people who have been campaigning on these two dual issues for over a decade. the past year it has been something quite amazing to them, because we were quite isolated for a long time in taking up those two positions. People who are campaigning on poverty didn't talk to people who are campaigning on climate, and vice versa. And that's totally opened up. As you say, it's blindingly obvious, the connections between the two. I think disenfranchisement with the energy sector, oil and gas companies, has never been higher among people, which is something we've really pushed for quite hard in the climate justice movement for a number of years. But these record profits being announced every few months have really done a lot of damage to their social standing, I think. So we're part of several coalitions, including the Warm This Winter Coalition, which has brought us together with groups like Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, and launched the first ever National Day of Action on Fuel Poverty, which took place in December, for which we did nine warm-ups, which is a form of protest that we've taken for a long time, including one at Scottish Power HQ in Glasgow. They started on the basis that if we can't afford to keep warm in our homes, then we feel we have the right to enter any public building or space and keep warm together there. A number of new movements that have come through, from I think Just Stop Oil to Green New Deal Rising, have been drawing the connections between the two, and we've had support from some of them for our demand, which is Energy for All, which we feel is quite all-encompassing. It would guarantee everyone's basic energy needs, things like heating your home, keeping the lights on, cooking a meal, for free, and everything beyond that would be paid for by a higher tariff. Excessive luxury energy use should pay higher tariffs, and on top of that, we would also end fossil fuel subsidies to oil and gas companies, as well as effective windfall taxes, which close the current loophole that's in place. So through that, we could insulate every home in this country, vastly reduce emissions and people's energy bills, and create thousands of skilled jobs. So we've got a lot of climate justice movements on board with that, and we will be launching a manifesto in the coming weeks, which everyone from climate justice movements to trade unions to local authorities would be able to sign on to. So that's something we're very keen to push out, and we feel it draws the two together perfectly in our view.
Power to the People, Jess, was sort of set up, I think, one of its main aims was to kind of build in working class communities, a kind of organization around these issues, and again, resistance. It didn't, although people, I remember going to some of those early meetings myself, and, the issue of climate was around, people mentioned it, but it wasn't central, and most of the people in it didn't come from the climate justice movement. A few did, So I'm just wondering how that connection looks from where you are now.
No, I think that's a fair assessment, Ian. I was going to say, the crux of it for me, sorry, I'm still just smiling away at this idea that Stu's just put forward. That's amazing. That's like the utopia, and that's the dream. Sorry, I'm still just quite happy about that. But yeah, no, I was going to say, the crux of it for me, I think, in terms of like the organising I've done, and the people I have spoken to as a result of, being involved in Power to the People, is I think we need to be realistic about the fact that, as both Stu and Chia have said, we're at a point where people can't afford to eat. They can't, as you say, we've heard terrible stories, of people using camping stoves indoors, putting their lives at risk because they can't afford to use the electric and gas in the house. And I think we need to be realistic about, when people are, in that dire situation, when you're struggling that much, I don't want this to sound flippant, but you can't expect people to be worrying about these issues that kind of seem so far away. And I understand, part of the issue we have is that, part of it's to do with the narratives around that. And we need to be changing those narratives to say, this is a problem that affects you. But my strategy, my solution to that would be bring them in the door, along with campaigns and issues that matter to them. So that's how, in my head, and I don't by any means mean, sorry, there was lots of means in that sentence. I don't mean that I see Power to the People kind of as an instrumental vessel. I don't mean that at all. But do you know what I mean? In my head, I always remember seeing in one of the trainings I did years and years ago, and it was this kind of diagram, you know, of sort of a little gauge that goes round, and you go, you know, from people who are completely against you to like the most active of activists, you know. And in my head, it's you just got to bring people one little step along the way towards where you want to be. And if, do you know what I mean, as you say, if our goal is to get people to the point where they care about overthrowing capitalism, they care about overthrowing the patriarchy, they care about, you know, wanting climate justice, that's absolutely amazing. But we need to get them a foot in the door first. And I think, do you know what I mean, for me, that's where that deep organising and those real community networks are going to have to come in.
I may be barking up the wrong tree here, Chia, but I'm just wondering whether debt could be a way of getting your foot in the door there, as Jess put it. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, you just explained the kind of debt issues that people are facing with their as a result of energy bills and so on and so forth. But debt is also now a big issue in the climate movement. Obviously, there are different kinds of debt. I'm just maybe they are too different. I don't know. But what do you think? Is there a connection there that can be made?
Yeah, there is a connection, definitely. So, like debt justice, we have 3 main campaigns. One of them is Together Against Debt. That's where I work, which is about household debt. But like the other thing we concentrate is climate debt. So that's like international. So mostly debt. So like countries like Pakistan, right? That they have just had so many people die because of the flooding caused by climate change, and they are in debt to the countries that are most responsible for causing climate change, which is just totally unjust. So we campaign to write off those debts, and so yeah, it's interesting the connection there, because even within debt justice, even though we're the same organisation, right now these campaigns are very separate from each other. However, we did have a national activist gathering in October where we connected the 2 issues. We had people from Together Against Debt there. We also had notable climate activists like Michael Loach coming to speak with the group about debt, and other people as a part of decolonising economics, speaking at that, where the 2 things were kind of interlinking. I mean, if I was to vision how these 2 things could interlink, I think it would be a matter of, once we've kind of created a debt movement effectively against unjust debt, it would be about connecting with the climate groups, because it's all interlinked, that are focusing on debt too. So you, as well as having debt justice, there's also a group called Debt for Climate, which is a global movement doing direct action around climate-based debt, and we work with them too. But also, like, on the low, it's not just the global level, it's the local level, because you know, in Glasgow, if more flooding is going to happen in certain communities like Govan, that people might be displaced from their own communities, or be in debt because of environmental damage that happens to their homes, right? So it's interlinked, and it's just, I think it's about holding spaces to have these conversations, which I was really lucky that Glasgow Greenpeace approached me not too long ago, and so in the Go Green Week, we kind of collaborated to kind of connect both these topics in an event we did called End the Crisis. Yeah.
Talking about links, one of the other kinds of links that we haven't mentioned yet, but is obviously people have been talking a lot about, obviously the wave of strikes in the public sector over the last few months, both in Scotland and elsewhere in the UK, have been unprecedented in most of our, well, for a very long time, let's put it that way. You know, going right back to the 1980s or something, you know. And obviously that's about the cost of living, essentially, you know. Yeah. So, and yet again, it's a slightly different area of activity, and, you know, everyone wants to support each other. But I'm just wondering what has been done, what can be done, what needs to be done, what can be done in terms of bringing those things together. Any of you? Chia?
sorry, just to note how we're linking kind of debt with the unions at the moment. So Unite for a Workers' Economy, it's quite interesting, similar to Power of the People, and a lot of other groups are kind of doing a lot of work in communities at the moment. And so what we're kind of doing is, and what they're doing is campaigns about food justice, and because that links to our school meal debt campaign, that's how we've linked. And I think no matter what your issue is, there are links. And if you go, I think the biggest thing about uniting with unions is that we need people to get to their union meetings really and see where they can like kind of create bridges there. Because I mean, what I'm really impressed with at the moment is that, I mean, this was like really hard to push in the climate movement not too long ago, before enough is enough was a thing, was getting climate activists to go to pickets, and we're beginning to see this now, and it's great. But how many of those activists are actually kind of joining unions? I'm not so sure, because I'm not sure what the education about like joining those spaces is, and like maybe we should be pushing that more in the green movement. And that's why I think a lot of us, you know, I'd say that people like my age, so I'm 23, a lot of us started our political journey from doing stuff like school strikes, but we might have not had a full-on political education in other areas apart from kind of activism, and I think there needs to be a greater political education amongst young people about you know, trade unionism, and also like workers' struggle and a lot more like that.
Interesting. Jess, what do you think in that area with this, linking up with the strikes and stuff? There's some work I know going on the south side on that too.
Yes, there is. Is this where I get to punt my meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we're having sort of like a meeting for groups, and we're trying to keep it as open as possible. I mean, I'll hold my hands up, that is what I've loved about Power to the People, is just kind of, it seems to have made such a conscious effort to overcome the parochialism and factionalism that we so often see in left campaigns. And do you know what I mean? Just like, I think we need to, at this point, be open to, you know, working with all kinds of groups, you know, as you say, obviously, Southside Strike Solidarity, you know, like the LGBT bookshop. Do you know what I mean? As you say, as Chia quite rightly points out, you know, all of our issues are so interlinked, and you are completely on the money when you said that about, you know, I think people just lack political education. And I think you're right in the sense that, because one of our main things moving forward, I think, is very much about, as you say, building these networks and using those to help people demystify, like, so in our case, obviously demystifying the energy industry, you know, sort of saying to people, or a lot of this stuff that's coming at you in the media isn't the truth. But also, as you say, I don't know, I kind of feel like, again, coming back to my little thing, when people's eyes get opened about one thing, I feel like, do you know what I mean? If people are sort of inspired, then they start to realize, oh goodness, you know, actually this information is fallible and that information is fallible. And again, I would completely agree with what Chia said. Like, I was not brought up in a political family at all, and I didn't really have much of a sense about trade unions. And so that's why I think, because as I say, it links back to what I said at the very start about, you know, the reason I got involved in Power to the People was because I think the people I spoke to when I was outdoor chapping, you know, just very much were coming out with things like, oh, you know, you speak to anyone in this street and they'll be angry about all this with the energy prices, but there's nothing we can do. You know, I think genuinely we seem to have, you know, and we don't need to go into, you know, the discussion about Thatcherism and as to why people don't have a sense that, you know, collective action doesn't work. But I think with people being able to see, you know, successes in the trade union movement, it will hopefully make them realize, oh, we can actually win things elsewhere. And, you know, vice versa. As you say, obviously, you know, the successes up in the Windford and stuff like that, you know, any pockets of working class solidarity that wins a victory, we need to be celebrating across the board, you know, and as you say, just working together. And, you know, as I say, I don't want to sound too much like I'm preaching, but do you know what I mean? We need to just do a bit of a better job of working together, don't we? I think sometimes we can all get a bit too, you know, this is my little campaign over here, and we just need to be coming together because, as you say, you know, this is what the ruling classes want, don't they? They want us to be divided, and that's not how we're going to win.
Great, thanks, Jess. We're beginning to run out of time, so Stu, I can just do come in on that if you want to, but I'd like to look just like a little idea of where do we go from here? It's a kind of short contribution round from each of you about what do you think the priorities should be in the next few weeks and months?
I mean, if I could come in that and really try and tie up almost the last three questions, I think where we can do better as the climate justice movement, and also from our perspective in fuel poverty action in relation to the strikes, is in building and communicating the narrative. I mean, that's what the trade union leaders in particular have done amazingly in the past few months. They've won the argument by spitting straight facts, basically. And I think among the climate movement, there's been a big shift in the past few years, but not fast enough. And for me, I want to hear less of communication around the science necessarily, and sort of terror that it does exist over what is to come, and that I don't dispute, but more communicating how this affects people in their day-to-day lives, kind of as Jess said, connecting the end of the world to the end of the month, and people meeting their bills, and the fact that climate justice should mean warmer homes, lower bills, accessible public transport, investment in our public services. So we need to connect with people on how this affects them in their day-to-day lives. Also on this issue of the strikes, there's direct comparisons to make with, for example, the health workers struggle at the moment in the context of fuel poverty rocking up and people sacrificing their health due to living in cold homes. At the same time, we've been very focused on this prepayment meter issue and have forced the government to act, yet Grant Shapps is refusing to bring in legislation to ban them outright, yet he's at the moment forcing through legislation to prevent workers from striking. So why are they so anti-interventionist when it comes to the energy company? And finally, just in a broader perspective, as we're calling for energy for all so that people's basic energy needs can be met, and striking workers are only demanding that they don't have jobs, pay and conditions cuts. So I'm continuously kind of communicating that these demands, none of them are that radical. We've been on the back foot for so long, as you say, going back to Thatcherism, that we're told that this can't be addressed at either end, whether it's our bills coming down or pay coming up. We're being told we'll be given nothing. So we need to be bold in our demands. We need to be uncompromising, I think, in calling out this system and challenging it that is continuously moving wealth from the bottom to the top. I don't think we should be at all compromising in the demands we're putting forward at the minute. As Jess said, ours might sound like utopia, so let's do it. Sounds brilliant.
Chia, a last quick word on what you would like to see next?
Whenever I envision the kind of things that I think are needed right now, I always come back to the three main areas. I think mutual aid, education and training, and mobilisation into campaigns and community organising, I think, are the three main things we need to be focusing on right now, because I think that's the way we're going to, I know Jess was kind of referring to the spectrum of allies before, bring everyone forward no matter what kind of point on that spectrum they are. And also that share our stories of what wins we've made, share the training. We have people who are involved in poll tax, and we had people who did great stuff with the anti-nuclear, environmentalism and more. Let's just get all those people in a room, share, see what worked, and share that with others, and work from there.
Yes, final word?
Nope, I think all mine have been taken. As you say, all I was going to say is just please go out. I would just urge people, please go out and talk to everyone you know. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes it can be the smallest earworm you put into someone that can change the world, can't it? So keep at it, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. We have run out of time, but that's a really, really interesting discussion, and at least for me, a really encouraging one too. So thank you very much. And this is the end of this episode of Rising Clyde. Thanks for being with us. Bye-bye.